The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everybody. This is Krishna Vadula from IUC and IFEES, and just delighted. I'm actually right now in India, so missing all that wonderful snow in the United States. Delighted to have you all join us for this very exciting webinar today. And this is, I'm sure you're all at different time zones right now, and thank you for joining. We've got quite a few people already with us, and I'm sure many more will join. This is the challenge that we all face as educators, how to assess teamwork and group projects. And I think I want to thank Allah for picking a nice topic for today's webinar. And I'm sure many people are looking forward to getting some tips on how to do that, because even the most experienced educators always have problems with doing this. Dr. Ala Ashmawi is the Dean of the School of Engineering at the American University in Dubai. And in fact, he's the incoming president of IFEES. So I want to congratulate him for that, for that appointment, that election that happened just in November during WEAF 2019. Some of you might have had a chance to go through his bio. He's Dean of Engineering and Professor at Civil Engineering at American University, Dubai. Prior to that, he was at University of South Florida and Georgia Tech, founding member of the UAE Engineers Dean's Council, member of the Executive Committee of GEDC, and President-elect IFEES. So thank you very much for joining us from your busy schedule, Ala. I know you're in the middle of your day, and as a dean, I know what it means to be in the middle of the day in your college and all the telephone calls that keep coming to you. So appreciate taking the time. I'm going to make you the presenter, and we'll be ready to get started. Okay, click show my screen, Ala, and you'll be all set.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, we're all set. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Krishna. Thanks for the introduction. It's actually the end of the workday here. It's 5 p.m. in Dubai, so great opportunity to share a few ideas with you all about how to assess teamwork and group projects. And when Krishna approached me regarding the webinar, I thought I could go for one of the big transformational topics, or I could just choose something that will that we struggle with as educators on a day-to-day basis. And it's something that's fascinated me for some time. And it's the idea of assessing teamwork and assessing group work. And there is a distinction between these two. So I'll just go straight into the slides here. So we're gonna be talking about two different things today. The first is group work, which is a product or a deliverable that is prepared by a group of students. This could be a report, it could be a lab project, and that's one aspect. And the other aspect that we'll look at is teamwork. It's a skill set, and it's the ability of team members to work collaboratively. And these two distinct entities are, it's important to make that distinction between them, because we often assess teamwork through group work. So the ability of students to work in teams is assessed through group work. And I'm gonna talk about this, but we have to keep in mind the distinction between the two. So I start with group work and what is group work. Some examples of group work deliverables, we all see them. We ask students to write a technical report, a group of students to write a technical report, a research paper, lab report. It could be a group assignment. They could be collecting experimental results, analyzing them, collecting data. And what is common in all of these is that these are performed by a group of students. The characteristics of these group work deliverables is, of course, that the work is performed by multiple individuals within that group. Typically, each individual will contribute to a certain task or a section or an aspect of the deliverable or the report. In very few cases, you will see all students working on all parts of the reports collaboratively, and that's the first part of that distinction. So typically the deliverable is a compilation of the individual contributions of the students. And if it stops there, then all we're assessing the technical content, the technical writing, the formatting, the consistency, and the adherence to the requirements that the students, we want to make sure that the students adhere to the requirements. They provided the proper technical content, proper technical writing, formatting, and we could assess all these aspects separately. We could have rubrics for all of these, but nowhere in there are we assessing the ability of the students to work in a team. As an example, you could have a group of students and you don't know who contributed to which part, or maybe they all contributed equally, each one working in their little corner, and then they just assemble everything at the last minute and submit it. Examples of this are experimental data that is collected in the lab by a team, let's say, of 3 students, just random names that I assigned there. So what happens is that the team members will divide the tasks. Ashley will collect some information on the equipment, procedure, practical applications of that experiment. We'll document this, and there'll be a page or a page and a half in the report. Joseph will perform the data reduction and analysis and summarize the results in tables and graphs, and that will be the data and results section of that report. Akash will evaluate the results, write a discussion, compare the results to typical values that are found in the literature, and write a short discussion and a conclusion. At the end of the day, they might together write a short introduction. They compile the work in a single document. They add a table of contents and a list of references, and they submit the work with a cover page. Nowhere here, again, have we directly observed the ability of the students to work in a group. Another example is a term project that is assigned not particularly as part of the lab, but in a renewable energy class. We have 4 students here that are asked to work together on a written report and a presentation, focusing on the current developments of bifacial PV panels. They will divide the tasks again. Pedro will write an introduction and some historic backgrounds about PV panels and how they came to be, and then the new technology, which is the bifacial panels. Lisa will write a section on the function, the characteristics, the technical aspects, the advantages and limitations of these bifacial panels compared to the conventional panels. Jasmine will write a section on the efficiency, the durability, and the installation requirements. And Khalid will write a discussion on cost, manufacturability, future trends. Again, they will compile the work in a single document. They will prepare a presentation. Each one of them might prepare 3 slides. They will present them in a sequential order. Each team member will present their part, and that's it. End of the group work. So let's recap what happened here. What happened in these 2 examples is that we had work that is performed by multiple individuals, but the teamwork skills, or the ability of the students to work in a team, to work collaboratively, it represented a limited aspect of that work. We don't know, they might have collaborated much more, but the examples that I gave are typical examples that most students, because of time limitations and pressure and so on, will usually adopt. Each team member will do a certain part. They will compile it and they will submit it. The deliverable is a compilation of the individual contributions. There is very little synergy between the team members. If we think about it, the fact that this work was done by a team is to some extent irrelevant. The team was formed to divide the tasks, to split the tasks, and to maintain a reasonable level of effort. So if we think about it, that same work could have been done by 1 person if they were given 4 times the amount of time that was allocated. The value in the teamwork that was done is not evident. The work is graded based on the technical content, technical writing, and adherence to requirements, as we said before, and we're not assessing the ability to do teamwork. And that's fine, this is okay. There are advantages to assigning team, group projects to keep a balance in terms of effort and acquisition of knowledge, in terms of making sure that students to some extent learn from each other. But three random thoughts that come here. The first one is something that we sometimes do, and that is that at the end of the day, all team members are awarded a single grade. And the justification that we give for this is that as educators, a lot of times we say, well, this is how it works in real life. They'd better get used to it. In real life, you're going to be thrown in a team. Either the team succeeds or the team fails. You all get the same grade. So the question is this the right approach? And my take on this is that that is not real life. In reality, when you have teams in real life, the members of that team are evaluated individually at the end of the day. We all work. I have a group of faculty here who are in the School of Engineering. We don't evaluate them collectively. We don't say they're a team. Either they all fail or they all succeed. And in many cases, they work in a team. Even when you look at projects, some limited scope activities and a particular project, the project itself is evaluated collectively. So the work, the deliverable could be evaluated collectively, but at the end of the day, as instructors, we should remember that team members should not be rewarded and penalized collectively. It's a little difficult and it requires a little bit of effort and a change in mental state, but I think this is a very strong message that I would like to share. I've been doing this for a number of years and the students have not complained, and I think that's fair. The second thought, that all team members are responsible for every aspect of the project, and this usually comes, sometimes it comes when there is an academic integrity violation. And we say, I don't care, you should have checked the work for academic integrity, you'll all be penalized. If there is some sort of an honor code or whatever, you're all accountable and so on. I think this puts undue pressure on students. We could do this in a formative way when the students are actually learning about academic integrity and so on. But I think it's really fair to say that it depends on the scope and the kind of project. As educators, we have postgraduate degrees, most of us. We understand that there is a collective responsibility when research papers are published. That's the nature of the beast. But that is not necessarily true in other settings, in industry settings and in projects and so on. If somebody makes a mistake, not everybody is penalized along with that person. We tend to assign responsibilities and levels of responsibilities. And we tend to, at the end of the day, to say that you are responsible for a lot of aspects of the project collectively, but there are aspects of the project where you should be evaluated and rewarded or penalized, if you will, independently. Here is the third thought that we come across, we hear it, is that you don't get to choose your team members. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this shortly. Is how do you assign? How do you select the team members? So, well, in real life, you don't get to choose your team members. You work, either you like them or you don't. So you don't get to choose them in my course either. And the reality is, in real life, it really depends. It really depends. If somebody's thrown into a group and they don't get along, eventually they're going to quit. Students don't get that chance. They need the grade. They don't have the option of quitting, switching jobs, and so on. And also, there is a very strong, very important element to remember, and that is smart project managers and smart leaders will choose team members who can work together most of the time, at least. In many cases, you wanna have people who might create a little bit of conflict and so on, as long as it's healthy. But at the end of the day, you have to choose team members who can work together. They don't all have to be the same. To the contrary, diverse teams work very, very well together. And that's another aspect. The smart manager will choose team members that come from diverse backgrounds and complement each other and so on. And the question is, do we want to do this when we're assigning group work? Do we want to think about it at least? Or do we just want to ignore it and say, I'll just assign the teams randomly and you move on, you have to live with it. So the first element, or the first question, is how many team members how many members per team should you have in lab work, for example, in group projects? We typically think of 3 members as a good number, 4 members. Typically we do this, we have a 5th member. The question is whether this 5th member is a free rider. So, and even the 4th member sometimes, and even the 3rd member. So we have to think, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this in a while, but that's a dilemma that we face. How do we deal with that situation? I started experimenting with something a while ago, and that is to have large groups where there are different tasks, and these tasks entail a network of communication and a network of collaboration between the team members. So you may have this person on the right here collaborating or having close collaboration with 1, 2, and 3 other members, but they don't get to collaborate with this team member. And that's really a reflection of what happens sometimes in real life. You might want to divide them into sub-teams and have a coordination between the teams, but there are different ideas that you can experiment with. And now we're getting at a point where we're not talking about group work only, but we're working about group work with the idea of how we can utilize this group work to enhance the learning of students in terms of the ability to work in teams. When you design group work, depends on how many students you want to have in a group, depending on what your goal is. And it's not one size fits all. So if your goal is to replicate a real life situation in a certain course, typically in advanced courses, you might want to allow the students to submit their preferences as to who they want to work with, and then you try to optimize the teams and try to honor these requests as much as you can. That's sort of what happens in real life to some extent. It happens on a longer time scale, but if you're forming a group for a term project that's going to take a whole semester, you might want to think about this. If your goal is to maximize learning, that's kind of a formative assessment. You want to do a formative assessment exercise, and you want to maximize learning. In this case, it's always very good to pair the good students with the weaker students, so that they can learn from each other. And in this case, both of them learn actually. It's not that one student will help the other. They actually end up both learning, and that could be another discussion for another day. But this is a great way to make students learn. If your goal is to reduce grading effort because you have a large number of students, you want to form large groups, but I sincerely hope that this is not what you try to do. There are other ways to deal with grading and so on, and hopefully you're not assigning or you're not forming groups to grade 5 versions of the assignment instead of 20 versions. So if your goal, if there is no value in having these students work in teams, then don't do it. If your goal is to ensure fairness, then there is a way to rotate and randomize participants. This will is good in classes where you have multiple labs or multiple assignments, and then you can have a rotation amongst the team members, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a while. If you would like to promote entrepreneurship mentality or an entrepreneurial mentality, you should allow the students to choose their partners and then let the best survive and so on. So if you're teaching a course that deals with innovation entrepreneurship, you have to let the students choose their partners. If you're doing a major assessment like the capstone design course, I do let the students choose their groups, because this is a critical activity, and it's really important to make sure that the students are able to work with people they get along with, and so far that's been working well. What kind of teams do you wanna have? You could look at homogeneous team members. All members are of equal academic standing, so you put the A students together, you put the B students together, the C students together, and you think that that's good because that's fair. And what I found consistently is that students do not like this. Students do not like this for various reasons. You end up with homogeneous team members. So there is an aspect of diversity and learning by virtue of diversity when you have teams that are not in silos. You don't have all the A students together and all the F students together, because you don't want to have a free rider. Nobody learns. There is a lot of friction amongst all the team members, and it's not a very healthy solution. You could try, as I said earlier, you could try to pair different, or not pair, but you know, match different students of different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, and you should look at that as one of the aspects when you're forming groups. When you have rotating groups, if you have 10 lab experiments in a semester and you want to rotate the groups, there are simple ways to do this. You could look at a situation where you say, I'm going to number the students as 1, 2, 3 through all the way through 9. This is going to be the first order. The first group of teams is going to be formed as such. 1, 2, 3 is one team. 4, 5, 6 is the second one, and so on and so forth. And then the next experiment, you could have a horizontal match where you take 1, 4, 7, 2, 5, 8, and so on. And that problem fascinated me. Once you get to a rotation where you have a lot more experiments to run, you can start going diagonal and so on, and then you get to a point where it becomes you know, really difficult to try and just keep moving all these students around throughout the semester, trying to change the order of the groups and to make sure that everybody gets a chance to work with everybody else at least once, or to try to minimize the chances of having two people work together way too often. And I found out that there's something that's called the social golfer problem. Some of you might be familiar with it. The link is there, and it has the solution for this. So there is a mathematical solution for this. As an example, if you have 7 lab experiments and you have 5 groups, so you have 35 students in your class, here is a standard matrix that you can use to shuffle these students throughout the semester. So in lab 1, you have ABC, DEF, GHI. Each one of these is a group. Then when you move to the second, you have ADG, BEJ, CFM, and so on. And if you follow this pattern that's on the screen here, which you can find at the link down here, you will end up matching everyone with everyone and minimizing you know, repetitions and so on. It's a very neat problem. And then if you go further, there is on that same website, there are actually graphical mathematical solutions for this, and it's just, I find this to be fascinating. They have all different sorts of combinations. So how many students you have in your class? In this case, 9 students. You want to run 4 experiments in groups of 3. You follow this color code and you got your teams. If you have 16 students, you want to run 5 experiments and you want to do them in groups of 4. Here is a beautiful graphical solution. I'm sure it has a mathematical equation that captures all of this. And again, I find this to be fascinating. 12 students running 4 experiments in groups of 3, and you have all different sorts of combinations. I think you have something like around 20 different permutations and combinations that you can use. And you can just go there, and if your goal is to randomize your group members, you just use the matrices that are available on that website. How do we grade group work? You can grade it purely on an individual basis. And in this case, this is always a good idea, what we see here. To have a breakdown of responsibilities and contributions, you ask the students to put this on the first page with the table of contents and so on. You could run peer evaluations, and these, by and large, they make sense. They do make sense. And you could rely on your own observations. This is, you think it's fair, it's probably fair. It's a little greedy because each student will know that they are evaluated individually. So they will try to do more work, and they're not going to focus on the teamwork aspect. Collective basis for grading, as I said earlier, I think this is unfair. You've got free riders that do nothing and get rewarded for it. You have perfectionists who will take on the responsibility of making sure that the report is perfect because they want to get the A. And if the other team members are not doing the work, they're going to end up doing 4 times the work and submitting this perfect project. Or you can use a hybrid. So you say some portion of the grade is on the individual contributions, and then some portion is on the formatting and the consistency of the technical writing and so on. And I think this is the best approach, whether you want to go 80-20, 50-50, whatever it is. We switch to another topic, which is teamwork abilities. The ability of students to work in teams. Here we are assessing the ability of students to work in teams, not the quality of the product or the deliverable. So we're assessing the skills. As an example, the new ABET outcomes, for those who are familiar with them, outcome 5 says students will be able to solve some sort of language similar to this to function effectively on a team whose members together provide leadership, create a collaborative and inclusive environment, establish goals, plan tasks, and meet objectives. And really the key in what ABET wrote is or developed is this. We want students who can create collaborative and inclusive environments, who can establish goals, who can plan tasks and meet objectives. And this is what we want to assess. Is the student able to create a collaborative and inclusive environment within their team? Is the student able to establish goals, plan tasks, and meet objectives and work collaboratively with others? So we're looking at something totally different. A properly designed group work, not teamwork. So a group project or a group report is necessary for developing teamwork abilities and assessing each individual student's abilities to work in teams. So if you want to fully assess the ability of students to work in teams, you have to put them in teams, basically. The second point is that a high quality deliverable at the end of the day is a necessary condition to demonstrate that the students have mastered the teamwork abilities. However, a high quality deliverable, if you get a perfect report, it doesn't necessarily mean that the students understand how to work in teams. If you get a low quality deliverable, it definitely means that one or more elements of the teamwork has been compromised. So how do we go about assessing the ability of students to do well in terms of teamwork? The first question you should ask, is the final product that is a result of A, B, and C has more value than the sum of the individual contributions of the students? Or is it just the sum of the individual contributions? If it's just the sum of the individual contribution, it means that you have not assessed, or they did not work well as a team. There has to be a value added in having that team of students who work in a team. So let's look at some of the elements of teamwork. Proper teamwork requires time management, scope management, coordination of tasks between the members, leadership, and I'm going to talk a little bit about these, negotiation skills, conflict resolution, communication, and a lot of other items. This is only a partial list. And you should consider this in your instructional design. So if you're designing an assessment that you want to focus, your main focus is to assess the students' ability to work in teams. You should be assessing these components. You should be assessing time management, scope management, task coordination, leadership, not the actual final product. The actual final product is the icing on the cake, if you will, or is a result of all of this, but you should be assessing these elements. You could design individual assignments at the formative stage to develop teamwork abilities. So you could give individual assignments, individual research for students to read about conflict resolution, to read about leadership, and so on, and learn about the aspects of teamwork. However, when it comes to summative assessment, or when you really want to evaluate whether they have actually attained the outcome, then you have to have group assignments, exercises, and projects. You could do video recordings. You could look at minutes of meetings between the students. All of these are indicators, and you could grade these and make sure that you have rubrics or criteria for grading these that are relevant to teamwork. Peer evaluations are very good. The students will tell if somebody's not working properly or effectively as a team member with them. You could have external evaluators, and the more you have of these, the more fair the evaluation is. There are online assessment tools, there are software tools for collaboration, and you could actually embed certain indicators within these assessment tools to see the level of collaboration between the students. You could also rely on plain old direct observation as a professor and keep the students updated throughout the semester as to how they are doing in terms of teamwork abilities. Whichever tool you use, you should have a rubric. And after several trials and so on, I found this. I didn't invent this, but I found it and found it to be very useful. In a lot of literature, there are different components, but as far as engineering education is concerned, I found these 4 components to be critical components or critical elements of teamwork: communication, leadership, quality, and time management. And this is what I use. So I tell the students, you're going to be evaluated 25% on each one of those, and here is the rubric at the beginning of the semester. This is how I'm going to be evaluating you, whether it be through direct observation or group assignments and so on. As an example, when it comes to communication, students have to communicate frequently with each other. They should be familiar with all changes and all updates, and they should act on good suggestions. Some students will do this. Some students will communicate much less frequently, may not be aware of changes that happened in the project throughout the semester, and they just ignore suggestions. So that's communication. Leadership, some students will not participate in decisions and will rarely assist other members. Assisting other members with their tasks is a very important element of leadership. A good leader will contribute to team decisions and will always assist others with their tasks when needed. The third aspect is quality. If a certain group member produces work of low quality, it will affect others. And the opposite is true. So somebody who produces high quality work will have definitely a noticeable positive impact on the work of the other team members. Somebody with low quality of work will cause the others to redo their work later on. So the quality, and you have to have periodic reporting on progress, and you can monitor quality, and quality is part of is an element of teamwork. And of course, time management, that goes without saying. People who are ahead of schedule will allow the others to proceed with their contributions, whereas if somebody's behind schedule, it will have a negative impact on others. In conclusion, I want to highlight 3 points here. The first one is assessment and grading of group projects, and assessment of teamwork abilities are basically two different animals, if you will. So grading group projects is one thing, and assessing team or assessing group projects in terms of technical content is one thing, and assessing the ability of the students to work in teams is something else. And you have to design your assessments accordingly. Group work and teamwork should be assessed individually to a large extent rather than collectively. You still have to have a collective element, but largely it has to be individual. And teamwork abilities should be assessed. If your goal is to assess these, they should be assessed outside the just traditional realm of just assigning group projects and assessing them. And with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you all very much. And I think I'm 5 minutes behind schedule.
Yeah, no, you're perfect. We have enough time to have a very good discussion, Ala. This is fascinating. What the conclusion is that it's very hard. Okay, what you're telling me, and I'm sure many of the people here are, also there are about 60 people, less 70 people here, and it's very hard. So as a faculty member, it'll be very hard. So I will not do it. So it's very difficult. It's complicated, and I think it takes a lot of experience and a lot of thought to really do a good job of assessing the teamwork. I mean, as you said, most people are just do what you showed in the first slide. Just have a group and divide up the project and then assess different pieces of it. And but to do it right, I mean, you've shown the way to do that. We have people who would, I'm sure, like to join in for discussion. But before that, let me check if any of the guys on the panel want to add a few words or so to what's been said. Let's maybe we got Serene, Uriel, and Manivanan is here, and we got Hans, and maybe we'll start with them and see if they have any particular comments. Serene, do you want to jump in and tell us a little, but have a discussion and start a discussion? Serene, Uriel, unmute yourself. Okay, let's see. Go ahead. Yeah, Serene, go ahead.
Hello. Oh,
hello. Yeah, either one. Yeah.
Hello.
Serene, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was great and extremely timely towards the end of the semester. Thank you so much. The distinction between group work and teamwork, I think, is not even clear to us instructors sometimes, and we need to make sure students understand that also. So how do you tell students who have maybe not done this too many times, maybe it's their first time, and you're telling them the whole should be bigger than the sum of its parts? Are there any examples? Of course, this is going to depend on the discipline and the kind of project you're giving them, but how would you put the final picture or concept in front of them at the beginning of the activity, so at the end they understand how they're getting evaluated?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It's not easy, but it's not that difficult either. I think the key is this doesn't have to be in all group work. We should still perform or assign group work the plain old way as we do it all the time. But when it comes time to really allowing the or empowering the students to acquire teamwork skills, it has to be done at the beginning of the semester, or it has to be done across the whole curriculum. It would be even better. But even in an individual course, you can simply tell the students at the beginning, you will be evaluated on your ability to work in teams. They will be made aware of this concept of the whole should be more than the sum of the parts. And as a few examples, you could have each student work on their own task, but then have them review as part of the assignment. Review somebody else's work and comment on it and give them feedback and improve it. In this case, then definitely it's not just the sum of the individual. So that's a very simple way of handling this. The other thing I do, I tell them I found the rubric, or you know, this is not the full rubric, but the variation of this to be given to the students at the end of the semester just makes them aware of what they need to think about. They need to think about quality, about time, about helping others, and about communicating with others. And that mindset will.
You mean beginning of the semester, not at the end,
Yes,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. They have to be made aware. It has to be part of the course grade. It could be 10%. It could be 5% of the course grade. And really, it doesn't matter to students. They actually enjoy it once you do it, and you let them know what they will be learning. They actually appreciate it at the end. It has to be explicit, and it has to be clear to the students.
Great. I think that's a key, I guess, telling them beforehand what's expected. Sirin, you want to add anything before we go on to Uriel?
Yes,
Uh,
hello everybody. Congratulations, Allah, very good presentation. And you know, I've been doing this kind of practice for some years now, and I agree with almost all the tips you gave to us. But one question I have, and that is still a problem even for me, is that how can we deal with a course with a lot of students? I mean, for example, usually in my courses I used to have 40 students, so organizing teams in a number of 3 or 4 in each team, it makes up to 10 groups, and then assessing 10 groups in different tasks and different skills it takes a lot of time. I used to do this, but it's really very difficult, and it takes a lot of time. Do you have any suggestion, any clue about how to deal with this issue of the time it requires for us instructors?
Yes.
Just go to the dean and tell them you can't do all that work. You
cannot. Absolutely. In a class with 40 students and 10 groups, and each one has 4 students, you cannot expect to actually you know, develop skills within the students. They have to develop them by themselves. You can guide them, and then at the end of the day, in terms of how do you assess it, definitely not through direct observation, which we always tend to do, and is, in my opinion, very powerful and very fair. But in this case, you don't wanna do it through direct observation. If you have the ability you have the resources to get some external evaluators and external maybe teaching assistants or something, excuse me, then you should do this. But otherwise, you can rely. Students learn from each other a lot, so you can rely on peer evaluations. You can team up students from diverse academic backgrounds and strengths and so on, and they will learn from each other and will develop these skills. So you can rely on these peer evaluations, and you know, maybe when we meet next time, I'll be happy to share with you some details on these.
I think it's a great idea. I think once you explain to everybody what you're trying to do, I think peer evaluation will actually make them more mature and able to deal with it. Sirin, did you want to add anything beyond your conversation before I go on?
Very briefly, at the end, when they're presenting the work, sometimes the presentation skills sort of take the forefront. One of the things I'm toying with is to completely ban PowerPoint, so that
I'm using PowerPoint for this presentation, and I hate PowerPoint.
But you did a great job. I mean, sometimes our students just turn around and they want
but
to.
One thing that you could ask the students is in this case, for example, if you want to assess their ability to work in a team, you look at the flow of the presentation rather than the individual components. Do they have a single train of thought, or is it just 4 different students presenting 4 different ideas? The other thing you can ask is, one of my colleagues here always asks the question, can you give me one example each of, you know, the students of how you collaborated with somebody else. Okay, give me an example of something that you worked on collaboratively. So you had to design something there, so you went to the person who was in charge of reviewing the cost, and the person who was in charge of designing the technical, you know, in charge of the technical design. We sat together, we discussed, we found that there are more than one way to build this. And so we discussed the cost, and we found out that the best solution is this. So, you know, make that as part of the presentation, I think is a good.
Nicholas Elton, you had a comment, you want to jump in? I unmuted you.
Yeah, I don't know if that was Krishna. How are you? And thank you, Allah, for this presentation. I just wanted to know, and I want to know your thoughts mainly on have you ever considered evaluating teamwork outside the curriculum? Because we all know that this is kind of an ability that it's developed from outside and through the curriculum, and not exactly or specifically in one individual course. So have you ever considered like informal or outside the curriculum evaluations? That's my comment.
Yes, definitely. And then, you know, there are ways at the school level that you know, your school or your college has to be committed to this. But you know, students, for example, working with some of the clubs and the societies, the professional chapters and so on, to develop, or maybe to have them compete in, you know, participate in competitions. All of this is good. I did focus today on how to integrate that within the curriculum, because that's not something that's commonly done, I would say, or in my opinion, not properly done. But by all means, there are a lot of opportunities to do this outside, and I think student competitions is a great way to develop these skills.
A couple of comments, questions about software and automated tools from Larissa Shelkin and Julian Yeps. They want to know if there are any tools or software that you use to make your life easier while working on groups and teams.
I have to admit, I am not an expert in this. I know that there is software. The only software that I use is Blackboard. It's not really software, it's a learning management system. And part of this, there are tools embedded in it, like wikis and group discussions and so on. So this could be used as this. But there are a lot of more advanced software tools. I'll be happy maybe to do this and then you know, to research this a little bit more. And send it to you, Krishna, so that you can share it with the participants.
Okay, now Saravana from India asks, is there any method for handling non-equally divisible members? You find difficulty in rotating team members, can't divide them.
Of course. So you end up with groups of 4 and groups of 3, and that's perfectly fine. It requires a little bit more thinking in terms of making sure that the level of effort should be the same. So maybe the scope that you give to a group of 3 should be less than the scope of the project that you give to a group of 4, and definitely, yes, that happens all the time.
Prasad from India asks about conflict among students, how to develop a rubric free of conflict among students.
That's a good question. I think if students observe these aspects, communication, leadership, quality, time management, that things will be smooth throughout the semester. So conflict happens because it builds up. But having said this, negotiation and conflict resolution is a topic by itself. And I've faced situations in the past where there was conflict. You try to resolve it between the students and their conflict resolution techniques and so on. But at one stage, I remember there was an extreme situation where I told the group member, "You're fired. You work on your own, and you don't get any credit for teamwork. You will still get a grade, but that was an extreme situation." But I think things like mediation and negotiation and so on are used in conflict resolution, and it's part of the learning process for students.
Okay, the couple of questions from Felix Arokia. One has to do with will systematic assessment of teamwork and group projects take away the fun and enjoyment of learning?
That's right. I agree. If you're focused on the techniques and so on, then it's just like anything else. I mean, you know, having scores for projects, telling students that you'll have 10% on technical writing and 40% on content, and it's this and that. It's the nature of the beast. I think what's important is that, you know, I think I presented a lot today, but this is not what I do on a day-to-day basis. So my focus on a day-to-day basis as a professor is not to look at the rubric that's in front of us here and to check where each student is. That's not the goal. I do this maybe 2-3 times a semester, and beyond this, it's a mindset. It's a mindset, and I totally agree. It has to be a mindset. If assessment becomes a process of its own, then it takes away from whatever we're doing.
So this same Felix has another question that generally teamwork and group assessment you know, allows the way we do it most of the time allows free riders to get along, to a lot of free riders. How do you avoid? And you did mention a little bit about that, but what's the best way to avoid free riders?
Yeah. So the free riders, there are two things. First of all, there are the division of responsibilities and tasks. So everybody is, maybe you want to have the students work together, but everybody, each student has a particular, is responsible for one particular aspect of the project. So the free rider will show. The other thing is that I don't think you should penalize. I think the key is this: if you don't penalize the whole group for a poor performance or poor work ethic of one person, then the free rider will have to work. I think that the issue is that if you say that the bulk of the grade is on the product itself, you will always have a free rider because you will always have a good student who will want to get a good grade. So that's one aspect. Make sure that you have delineation of responsibilities and tasks. The second aspect is the teamwork rubric that we're seeing in front of us here. You just have to have each student submit. If it's a semester-long project, you have progress reports. You can ask each student to submit a separate report or a separate progress statement, and you can get the free rider to start getting real work done.
Mm-hmm. CatMe, you must have heard of CatMe. I think a bunch of people have, they swear by this software called CatMe. Julian points it out. Yes. What do you think about it? Have you used it? What are your thoughts?
I have not used it. I have not used any software. I would like to experiment with it. There is another software. I just don't remember the name. But yeah, I would like to start experimenting with these. What I've done so far is on Blackboard. Most of what I've done is some of the course tools in Blackboard. But I have not used any of these.
Actually, I'm glad you've not used them yet, because that means you're really getting into the real understanding of group projects and team assessment. And once you do that, maybe looking at the tools might help you pick the right tool. Otherwise, you kind of blindly follow some tools.
You follow the tool and garbage in, garbage out.
That becomes your driver. Yeah, right. So yeah, Surya and Razu does. During group work, if you find teamwork is not satisfactory as per rubrics, is it advisable to change the groups, I guess?
It really depends. I mean, it really depends on where you are, whether it's a semester-long project. I think it's always a good idea if you, for example, if you have 10 lab experiments, there isn't much you can do in terms of assessing teamwork in this. So you will shuffle the teams anyway, and you will see how team members work together, but you're not going to be able to assess and readjust. Maybe when you have a semester-long project, then you can at some stage interfere or intervene and reshuffle the groups. I personally don't think it's a good idea. This is why I always prefer to make sure that when the students are put in a group, that they either choose their group partners or that they are comfortable with their group partners, so that we don't run into this situation. It becomes very, very difficult to handle.
Great. Graciela, yes, we will be having a recording of this and it'll be made available. I know some of you, depending on which part of the world you're in, might be having bandwidth issues and may not have heard the conversation very clearly. So we will be having a recording of this and it'll be made available. You just have to email me or and we'll take care of that. I'd like to, while wait for any other comments or questions, give Hans Hoyer a couple of minutes, and Mani, if you want to say anything, just jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Krishna. Good evening, Hala. Wonderful, well articulated seminar today. In fact, there are a lot of challenges are facing, especially with respect to Indian context, is with respect to these projects, because there are lack of skills within the group of the students, where one person can work in a very big way, whereas other people are not able to coordinate. So it's well articulated, and we got a lot of input. In fact, on behalf of our IFEES, I thank you for your wonderful presentation. I hope this particular presentation I'll take forward, and where a lot of institutions are working for the various projects. Okay, it will be an eye-opener for Indian context. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mani.
Allah, many thanks. This is, I to be very honest, I've not given a lot of thought to those issues, not having taught a class directly for quite some time, but a couple of issues, and we won't have time, is how does cultural diversity impact this? For example, and as we're looking at our community, we have Argentina here, we have Dubai here, Turkey, India, of course, et cetera, How are those kinds of issues handled and so forth in those different cultural contexts, and how can we learn from one another? And certainly, a webinar like this contributes to a dialogue. But the other question is, what different kind of question would we have received if we had a corporate colleague here? As she listens to this, and as Chinese professionals work with Brazilian and Turkish professionals, for example, not just in groups in the same place, but online. And how do you solve those kinds of complexities? I'll stop right here.
You stumped me, Hans, because
The tough question, yeah, but go ahead.
No, it's a very good, very valid question. To answer your first question, I think the context depends on the culture where you're playing this. In some cases, you have a very homogeneous culture, and the issues are going to be very different. Like Mani mentioned, for example, in India, maybe there are certain aspects of what I presented that would be very valuable, maybe other aspects that wouldn't. But to go back to the issue of diversity in general, what I found out is that when you have diverse, teams, by and large, I mean, very few exceptions, they work so much better, and they learn so much from each other as long as they have a common understanding of the goals and of the protocols of how to communicate. That is key. And so this is why I think this is a dinosaur. If you want to tackle this issue of having people collaborate online across continents and so on, Ramiro and I are working on a potential project where we're going to try and do this between students in the UAE and students in the US, and we're going to see how that goes, and we'll keep you posted. It's a challenge. It's a very complex. Very complex.
Even within classes in the United States, and we can think of women and diversity of women and men, and then also underrepresented minorities. I think those are issues that I guess we come up with all the time. Hans, keep going.
No, the other question was, if I were a Boeing or Airbus representative, what different questions would I have raised given this topic today, Allah?
I don't know, Hans. The way the teams work in companies is similar in some respects to what I presented. So there's certain aspects like the elements of proper teamwork are an important aspect. I think companies, the corporate world is much more advanced in terms of developing the ability of people, especially with large corporations, the ability, like you mentioned, Boeing and Airbus and so on, the ability of their teams to work together. They have a lot more tools, they have a lot more support, they have a lot more resources to develop these skills. So I am sure the questions would have been very different. I think they would be at a totally different level.
I wonder, does industry have training, for new employees and to develop the team skills,
Absolutely, and actually the ability to work in teams and the ability.
Can I add some more point in this connection with respect to this? Hans was telling some Airbus this thing. Can I give some additional comments in this connection?
Yeah, I think we're running out of time, so 30 seconds, and then we'll close. Okay.
Yeah, no. Thing is, see, the thing is for all this Airbus and like Dassault system, they got a well-defined system, and the process are well-defined. So what Allah has given in his presentation, the teamwork based upon the individuals and as well as 1 or 2 and 3 like that. So they're well connected, they're interconnected. See that end of the day they want to attain the success. So okay, so the process is well defined. So each and every individual is involved in the process. See that end of the day they want to attain the excellence. So that's why when comparing institution industry is always move forward with respect to the task completion and other things, whereas institutions, because of the lack of skills and lack of coordination among themselves, it's kind of a bit problem. That's my point.
Thanks, Mani. Allah, you have the last word.
Yeah, no, I think what Mani mentioned is absolutely correct. Companies have a lot of resources in terms of project management tools and so on that can monitor these issues, and you know, a feedback loop type thing. They fix them. They have a lot of professional development for employees to improve their teamwork abilities. And I will say there was a survey, if you recall, done by GEDC a number of years ago, and the ability to work in teams is one of the top 2 or 3 skills that companies look for and that they develop within their workforce. So we're going to see more and more of this.
On that note, I think we should give Allah a big round of applause. Thank you so much for doing this, and also the great audience that we've had, the great questions that we've had. More than 60 people, very active.
Thank you for all. Thank you.